Scope. What does scope mean? What do you guys think about when you hear the word scope? What, huh? What comes to mind? Overview, okay. Some sort of grasp, okay. How much is occluded? That's cool, okay. What's hidden, right? Scope. Mouthwash? Okay. So let's do define scope. So what does scope mean? Scope is the extent of the area or subject matter that something deals with, or to which it is relevant. Okay, we widen the scope of our investigation. Okay, so that makes sense, right? You have some sort of area in which you are responsible for, right? And then if that's not enough, you can widen it, right? People are laughing. So here, the opportunity or possibility to do or deal with something. Okay, the opportunity or the possibility. So whether it's even possible to deal with something, right? Do I have the privilege? Do I have the access to do something, right? The scope for major change is always limited by political realities. It's very real.
No, it's real.
Yeah. Okay. But does that kind of make sense? And this actually applies to JavaScript, right? It's gonna, all of these concepts will apply. So scope in JavaScript and also in a lot of languages have to do with accessibility, and visibility. So the whole like occlusion thing is that was a good point. So whether something is literally visible to you or not, whether this part of the code base is visible to this other part of the code base, right? To determine whether that's true or not, JavaScript uses scope. Okay. So there are different kinds of scope that we'll get into, and then we'll talk about some best practices. Okay. So let's start with kind of like the most basic scenario. So let's say I have let name. Okay, let's get a real name. Can someone want to volunteer their name generously? Yes.
Daisy.
Daisy. Okay, cool. Like this?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Now I define Daisy, and I'm gonna console log name. Do you think this will show up on the console? Or do you think it has to be like right underneath? No, it'll show up. Yeah, of course, right? It's gonna be fine. And the reason is because, like, for us it seems obvious, right? But what JavaScript is doing is it's gonna say, okay, we're gonna define some variable, right? And then we're gonna get to this console log and we're gonna say, okay, we're gonna try to console log name, okay? And notice how name is not in quotes, right? If I put name in quotes, what happens? I just console log name, literally the word name, the string name, right? If this thing is not in quotes, what JavaScript is going to do is it's going to think, okay, this is a variable. This is a variable somewhere, okay? Have I seen this variable before? And it's going to look, and it's going to find it and say, okay, well, what's stored there? It's going to grab what's stored there, and then that's what's going to take place, kind of like take the place of name in here, and it's as if we're doing console log Daisy, okay? So of course, right? So line 10 has access to line 7. Now, if we do this, will this work? No, it won't. Reference error. Name is not defined. Okay? What if I do this? I put it like right after. Is that okay? No, but it's right there. What do you mean it's not defined? Right? I see it. It's right here. And so what this means is the JavaScript engine, right, reads from top to bottom, okay? And it reads line by line. And the way it works is when JavaScript is executing line 1, it only has access to itself and all the lines above it. Everything underneath, so from line 2 and down, is actually not visible. It's not accessible in any way. Okay? So line 5 has no idea what's happening in line 7. It just doesn't. It can only look up. Okay? So now we get here. And so by the time we get here, imagine like this from here down, it's just like this deep sea like water, right? Where you can't see it, it's opaque. But you can see up here, and I don't see name anywhere up there, right? And so therefore name is just not defined, it's not available. Okay? So that's like the first rule of scope, right? You only have access to variables that have been declared before you. You only have access to the lines above you, not below. Okay? But if you're below, right, you have access to all the names above you. So if I do this, right, this can look up and grab this, but this line doesn't know that this line exists. Does that make sense? Okay. Any questions so far? Sweet. Okay. So this right here, where we've defined this right here is called the global scope. This is called the global scope. And what does that mean? That means we are not inside of any sort of curly braces, right? We're not in any if statement. We're not in a for loop. We're not in a function, right? We're in the global scope. We're all the way on the outside. And how can you tell that you're in the global scope? You're just not indented at all, right? You're all the way up against here. So this is the global scope. And this right here is a global variable. This variable is defined on the global scope, so we call it a global variable, okay? So we say this is a global variable or globally defined variable, right? Okay. Great. So let's do something else. Let's do. This is going to be like example heavy. Okay, so we'll say function. We'll have a function. Okay, and it's going to say print. And this thing, what it's going to do is it's going to say console log name. And we need another name. Can someone else give us their name? Doesn't even have to be your name. Larry? Nice. Is that your name? Okay. Great. So we have name is Larry, and then this function is going to console log name, right? Now, who thinks we're going to see Larry when we run this? Okay. Who thinks we're going to see error? Name is not defined in my scope. Who thinks none of the above? None of the above. Nothing happens. Why does nothing happen?
Because name isn't declared within the scope of the function.
Not quite. Why is nothing showing up here? Okay, well, let's do this. I'm going to console log testing. Why doesn't even this work? You haven't called the function. Exactly. We haven't actually like brought this function to life. All we've done is we've defined it. Defining a function is totally different from using a function, right? Like imagine this as like your computer that's off, right? You have a laptop, right? And it's the screen's black, right? Someone has to turn it on, right? Someone has to run it. Your laptop has this ability to do all this stuff, but someone has to actually use it, right? To use a function, the same thing as to execute a function, or to call a function, or to invoke a function. They're all synonymous, okay? So how do you invoke a function? It's literally just the name of the function with parentheses afterwards. This is how you call a function. This is how you run a function. So great. This calls the function. A lot of people think like without this line, just this by itself will make this run. That's not the case. This is just like a tool. This is using the tool. Okay? So now, if I do this, right, we actually do see Larry, right? This function, we're trying to console log name, right, is going to find name out here. Yes.
Do we need return on a function?
We don't need return. Good question. It is generally recommended that all functions come with some sort of return. But this here I'm just trying to show you like whether a function, whether when you're inside of a function you can access a variable that's outside of yourself. Okay. So in this situation, right, what happens? Well, we execute this function, we run it. So what does that mean? We go in here, and we start going through line by line. Let's go here. Console log name. Is name available in this function anywhere? No, it's not, right? So at that point, what JavaScript does is it widens its scope. So it looks out. Okay, it looks out into the global scope and finds that there's a match, and it uses that. Does that make sense? So this right here is like we are in a functional scope because we are inside of a function. And so whenever you declare a function, whenever you're inside of braces, you are in some sort of scope that is not the global scope. Okay, this is a scope. Now what if, right, I do this? Will this work? Definitely. Should definitely work, right? What does this function do? It declares a variable name assigned to Larry, and I'm trying to console log name. Okay, what is JavaScript gonna do? Everything underneath here is invisible, right? So it's gonna look from here up. Okay, is name here? Yes, great. Grab whatever's there and console log it. Right? So here, right? Obviously that will console log. And if we do this, this will still console log. Where, okay, I'm trying to find what name is. Is name defined inside of this function anywhere? No, it's not. Therefore, I'm going to expand my scope, right? And look out and get this. And console log that. Does that make sense? Any questions on this? Okay. Now what happens if I do this? Do you think this will work? Holy crap, it does. Why is that? It's because, right, when does this line execute? It doesn't quite execute on line 24, it actually executes here, on line 29. Here we just define a function. And then what do? We get here, okay, let's define a variable, call it name and call it Larry. And then we get here, and then we go here. Okay, let's execute a function. Let's go in here. Have we seen name so far? We have, right? Because this console log doesn't run until this runs. And by this point, we do have a name. And so it's able to access name, okay? Now, what definitely won't work is if we do this. This says name is not defined. Why is that? We have a function. And then we try to run the function. What does that do? Okay, let's go here, console log name. Have we seen name at any point above this function call? No, we haven't. So name is not defined. Okay? So if you want, from within a function, if you want to access something, a variable, right, that variable has to exist either in the function itself or in the global scope, right? And it has to have been made available before the function actually executed. Okay, we're going to do a lot of examples of this. Any questions so far? Yes?
So even when let name equal Larry is on line 27, that's the global scope as well?
Yes, this is the global scope as well, because it's not inside of anything.
And so print is also global scope?
Print is also global scope, exactly. We are executing print on the global scope.
Okay.
Great question. Okay, now let's do this. Name equals Barry. So first of all, is this even allowed? Can we use the same name twice? Or the same variable name twice? Yes, this is actually fine. Unfortunately, it's fine. So now, if I try to run this function, right, I'm gonna go in here, okay? And then okay, so we declare a name, right, that's gonna be Barry. Which one do you think this will choose? This one or this one? Very. Are you sure this isn't gonna like override it because it's globally defined?
Because it's within
It is gonna be very. You're right. Right? Because why? What does this console log do? This console log just wants to find a match for name, right? And it's gonna start looking up. Okay? Looks right here. Oh, I found it. Boom. Right? JavaScript is super lazy. And as soon as it finds some way to satisfy what you're looking for, it's done. Right? You might be like, oh, well, you forgot about this one, right? They don't care. As soon as you find one, it's done. It's done looking. And this sort of laziness is actually really important. Is really, really, really important. Why is it important to be lazy? It saves a lot of energy, right? Both in real life and in here, right? It saves a lot of energy. Why? Because let's say this function, right? When it tries to console log name, it doesn't stop as soon as it finds one. Let's say it exhaustively searches the entire code base to look for other potential matches, right? That's a lot of wasted effort. What if your code is like a million lines long, right? Which like at Microsoft, it's millions of lines long, right? And it's all the way like in like line number like 500,000, okay? And you just want to console log name, and name is defined right above it. JavaScript should stop right there. It shouldn't look everywhere, right? The execution would take way too long if every single console log looked at every single line. Okay? So as soon as it finds a match, right, it's going to log that thing. And which match is it going to find first? It's going to look within its current scope first. It's going to look locally in its local scope, right? Before expanding in further. Okay? And it only expands if it can't find what it's looking for. So if we don't have this, right, we get Larry. Because is name defined inside of this function anywhere? Nope. Okay, let me keep looking, right? I lost my keys. It's not in this room. Let me look on in the rest of the house, right? This is the rest of the house, or this is the rest of the globe. Let me look literally everywhere else, right? But if it's in here, right? Why look anywhere else when I've found what I'm looking for? Okay, so it stops instantly. Okay, now let's do this. Let's put name in here. Okay. Bring this here. So I'm gonna put let's see, carry. So here what we're doing is we define a function that accepts an argument, and that argument, right, happens to be the same thing as the thing we want to console log. And we're gonna pass this carry. We're gonna pass it. So if we execute the function, then this name is basically gonna be carry, right? So this is gonna come in as carry. What do you think this line will choose? Do you think it will choose this one or this one? Okay, who thinks carry? Okay, who thinks Larry? Okay, if you didn't raise your hand, you have to explain like what the third option is. It's carry. It's carry. So what does this mean? This means, like in terms of like order of operations, right? PEMDAS. Whenever we try to console log something within a block, a locally scoped block, we're gonna first look within the curly braces first. If we don't find it, we expand our scope. And when we expand our scope, we don't actually jump right to the global scope. We expand into the argument list. We expand into here. Do we have a match here? Yeah, we do. Great. Okay, I'm done looking. I found what I'm looking for, and it's in console log it. And if this isn't here, right? Let's say this is like nothing, right? Then, okay, is name inside of here anywhere? No. Is it in here? No. So expand one more time to the global scope. Okay, and then we find a match. Now, what if we do nam instead of name? What will we see here? Larry, exactly. Why is that? Is name in here anywhere? Nope. Is it in here? No. It's very similar, but it's not, right? The same thing. So we go out here and we find a match. Cool. Does that make sense? The order of priority? Great. Now, let's do one more, right? Okay. I'm going to try to console log a name. And so we know that this is going to grab whatever's here. That's the first match, right? But I'm not going to give it anything, right? I'm not going to give it the argument that it's looking for. So what do you think will console log? Okay, who thinks undefined? Who thinks Larry? Because this is not defined, it keeps looking. It's undefined. Good guess, right? So no matter what, again, JavaScript, the JavaScript engine will find a match and it will literally just stick to that no matter what. It's like, okay, whatever this is, even if it's literal nothingness, right? I'm gonna print that, okay? And in this situation, right, a nothingness, like no argument at all, that's expected inside of a function is just undefined. And it's the program won't be like, oh, you probably meant to do this one, which is defined, right? Fun fact. There is something called default variables inside of functions. So what is that? It looks something like this. Perry. Okay. So what is this doing? What this is doing is, if this function is not passed a name, the thing that it's looking for, it's going to default to Perry. It's just going to automatically assume that you meant Perry if you don't give it anything. Okay? This is called default variables, and it's really, really cool. This was introduced recently. And this only happens, again, if you don't give it anything, right? It gives you kind of like the benefit of the doubt. Okay, you probably meant Perry. But if you do give someone, say Carrie, right? Because Carrie is defined, right? We don't care about the default, and name will be Carrie. Does that make sense?
What would happen if Carrie was not in quotation marks?
Ooh, good question. Right? In this case, if something is not in quotes, JavaScript is going to try to find the matching variable name. So it's going to look for somewhere up here where we said let carry equals. Right? And it says carry is not defined. Imagine it's the same thing as doing something like this, like console log hello. Right? Some people look at this and be like, oh, it's going to say hello. Right? But it's not. Hello is not defined. There's no quotes around this, which means I'm trying to find a variable somewhere up here that says like let hello equals whatever, or const hello equals whatever, right? Okay. So we'll do this. What? That's weird. Okay. Does that make sense so far? Cool. So let's do a couple more. So if we have a function, and let's see, we'll say outer, and then in here we'll say function inner, right? And in here we're going to console log name, and we'll say let name equals Mary. Okay, and then we'll say, okay, actually, in this case, if I run this, do you think we'll see anything? Console log to the screen. Will we see Mary? No. Why not? We didn't call the function, right? If we never call this function, it's like basically just like sitting on your desk. Okay? Like this function right here is a fire extinguisher. Okay? So some people think, okay, there's a fire extinguisher on the desk, right? So if I run this, the fire extinguisher should just run. That is not the case. All you've done is you put the fire extinguisher on the table by defining it. Okay? Now how do you use it? How do you use this thing? You have to invoke it, with parentheses. You have to call it. Okay? Until you call it, nothing will happen. Okay? Okay, great. If I call this, still nothing happens. Why does nothing happen still?
Because you didn't call the inner.
Yeah, he didn't call this inner function. This console log doesn't happen in outer. It actually happens in inner. And are we executing inner anywhere? No. So we have to execute inner. Okay? So to do that, we have to do that in here. And I'll tell you why we have to do it in here in a second. But now we see Mary. So what's happening? We've defined a function, right? And to run this outer function, I have to execute it. Okay, great. What does this outer function do? It defines another function, and then it runs that function, right? So that makes sense. Yeah.
Does that mean that you can put inner, you can call inner before the function inner, like on line 35? And then, like if we put inner.
So like this.
Yeah.
So.
But it's still within.
Good question. This is we're actually going to go into this. But in this situation, you actually can.
Okay.
You can call it, but it's an exception that you can do this. Like for example, if I define this function like this, const inner, like this, this is still a function, right? But I can't call it before. It says inner is not defined. So basically, when I try to invoke this, it can't find inner anywhere. Even the exactly.
Okay.
But if you use the function keyword, right, it actually makes this thing available before anything else, and we'll actually go into that concept later. But just for good practice, like you should call things after you define it. Okay, so this happens, right? Now, obviously, if you're inside of this function, if I try to console log something, it's going to grab the thing that's first available, right? Now, what if I have another name here? Say let name equals canary, right? Which one do you think this is going to choose? Mary. Yeah. Excellent. Okay. Now, what if I comment this out? What will this choose? Canary. Boom. Okay. Now let's do one more here. Let name equals fairy. What do you think we'll see here? Canary, exactly. Great. So and then if we comment this out, we see fairy. Okay. So the whole like rules of functional scope and how that expands applies to any level. Okay. So if you have a function that's very nested, right? The same rules will apply to that. Where like it's gonna start within like its most local scope first, and it's gonna gradually expand its way out, right? It's not gonna jump from in here straight to the global scope. It's just gonna jump out to the immediately available scope right above it, and then from here it's gonna jump out again. Does that make sense? Cool. Any questions on this? On like the expanding of the scope, the gradual expansion. And same thing here, right? So if I put name in here, and so inner is expecting a name to be passed in, and then we give it, right? Larry. Larry is passed in here, and we console log Larry. We totally ignore canary, right? Because this tries to find a match in these curly braces, it doesn't, and it looks in here, and it finds a match. And what is this? It's this thing. Doesn't care about these. Yes?
What if you take out the comments for let name equal Mary?
Okay, so just take this out?
Yeah. Oh no, sorry.
Oh, keep it in.
Keep it in, but not comment.
Yeah, like that. Great question. Great question. What do you think? This might actually freak out. Let's see. Okay. So the reason this freaks out, right, is because here it's as if we've defined a variable and said, okay, let name, like name is going to be whatever the value is passed into here. So it's as if in this argument, we've done like let name equals Larry. And then right afterwards, we can't do let name equals Mary. It's basically the same thing, as doing something like this. Let name equals Larry, and then let name equals Mary. Remember when we tried to define something within the same scope? We couldn't do that. So this actually won't work. Good question. Really, really good question. Also, this is just like, this is rough, right? If you're expecting an argument to come in as name and you also define a variable called the same thing, that's generally unfortunate. Okay, now if I don't expect anything here, what do you think this will log? Canary. Excellent. Great. Now what if I put name here? Bonus question. Actually, it's gonna freak out because I did this thing. Okay. What if I do this? What will this default to? This one or this one? This one, right? It finds a match. Well, what is this? It's here. And what is that? Nothing. Undefined. So name is undefined. Okay? So there's like this like cascading thing that happens, right? Okay. One really, really important thing about scope is so far we've seen that from the inside we can look outward, right? We can look out to the global scope. What if I try to do something like this? I have a function, right? Logger, and we'll say console log name. Actually, no. We'll say let name equals Gary. Okay? And then here, I try to console log logger, or name. So, unlike the other example, from the outside, I'm trying to access a variable that's defined inside of another scope. Right? From the global, I'm trying to look into the functional scope. Do you think this will work? It will not. It will not. Ooh, because you didn't call the function. That's a really good guess. That's a really good guess. Because calling the function declares this variable, right? Still doesn't work. This still doesn't work. And the reason is because according to the rules of scope, right? Everything like from the outside, right, from the outer scope, everything that's defined inside of the block is invisible. It's not accessible, right? To think of the earlier example, like this line only has access to all the lines above it. Everything else is just darkness. Okay? And so similarly, like if I'm out here in the global scope, this function is like a black box. It's totally invisible to me. I can't look in here. Okay? But the flip side is true, right? Where if I'm inside of here, I can look outward. I can expand my scope and get stuff, pull stuff out of the global scope. But if I'm in the global scope, I can't look inward. Does that make sense? So it's a one-directional like access. Yes.
What if our function returns name?
Ooh, okay. So if this returns name, right? Well, the question is, who are we returning name to? Who is this going out to? This function just runs, and like name isn't actually captured anywhere.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like as a variable.
Mm.
So we'll get the same issue. What we can say is okay, define name out here, and let name in the global scope be whatever logger ends up returning back, and that's going to be stored in here, and then we can console log it. We can also just return Gary, right? What does logger return? It returns Gary. So what does that mean? It's as if we just did this. Boom. Right? This function, whenever you call a function, just picture it like transforming into the thing that it returns. That's all it is. Okay, it returns Gary. Now name is Gary, and we can console log name, right? Okay, but if we don't do that, we can't look from outside in. Okay, it's just it's totally invisible. Think of it as a one-way mirror, right? If you're on one side of the mirror, you can look in the other. You can from one side you can look in, but from the other side you can't look out. Does that make sense? Do you think it's called a one-way mirror or a two-way mirror? One-way mirror. Who thinks one-way mirror? Okay, two-way mirror. You've also heard of two-way mirror, right? Which one is it? Okay. Okay. So one-way mirror is also called two-way mirror. Or one-way glass or half silvered mirror. Okay, half mirror. That's weird.
I like that.
Yeah. So it's a little bit pretentious. But a one-way mirror and a two-way mirror are the same thing when they seem like opposite things. But they both represent the same thing. I think one-way, yeah, it's got to be one way. You can only see one way. Two-way is like you can see both ways. Why would anyone use that?
You can only reflect one way too.
You can only reflect
Like
one way.
severe reflection one way too. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, so a normal mirror is actually also a one-way mirror, right?
Yeah.
Because it only works one way.
And there's that logic.
Like, 'cause it has two functions.
Oh, okay, all right. Wow, it's definitely a two-way mirror. It's definitely a two-way mirror. Okay. Okay, so everything from the outside is visible to the inside, but not the other way around. Okay. So we did a bunch of these, so you should be fine here. Let's see. Okay. Well, let's just do this one practice round real quick. Do this. Can't see the answer. So we have outer, right? Outer has outer var, outer. Inner has outer var as a variable name, as an argument. Inner var is inner. And then in this inner function, we try to console log outer var and inner var. Okay? So let's try to console log this. What is outer var? Does this match this one or this one? You can just say this one.
This one.
This one, exactly, right? And what is this one? It's nothing, right? Okay, so that's nothing, that's undefined. And inner var is right here. So that's inner. Does that make sense? Cool. Okay, and if I'm here, if I'm in this line, if I'm on line 11 and I try to console log inner var, right, from just outside of the function, it's gonna error. I can't access from this outer function into here. Does that make sense? So anything that I define in here is only accessible to this function or any nested function, but not from the outside. For now. There's a way to get around that. Okay. Block scope. So we saw scope. We saw the scoping that's brought forth by the functions, right? The functional blocks. Any block of code, right, actually creates its own scope too. So any curly braces. So if true, and in here you define a variable called block, right? Can I console log block from in here? Yes, it's right here, right? I have access. But from the outside, this stuff is just totally like, imagine it's just like censored. I can't look in here. And so block to the global scope is like, it's as if it's not defined. So it can't even look in here.
Because you have to access true for like
Huh?
that function.
Yeah, like this block is just in a different, it's like on the dark side of the two-way mirror or whatever, right? It can look in here. But from this if statement, right, I can access stuff from that's defined up here. I can pull stuff in. It only works one way, right? It's a one-way mirror. Okay. So common question is, when is var ever used, right? When is var ever used? And var is, don't ever use it. Don't ever use var. It was the only way to define a variable before ES6. So ES5 and before, it was the only way you declared a variable in JavaScript. Okay, and it's a little bit weird because it doesn't conform to the rules of block scope. And so if I define an if statement like this, right, this block shouldn't be available from out here. But var kind of just bypasses that and makes it available. And this is the source of actually a lot of issues in JavaScript. When you want like some neatly kind of sequestered chunks, like code blocks, right? You get some weird interactions if I like define block in like various if statements. They all like start overriding each other. And so stay away from var. There's nothing that like you can't accomplish with a combination of let and const. There's really no situation where you have to use var. But this is one of the issues that arises. Another thing about var is it actually, so it ignores block scope, but it actually respects functional scope, right? So if I define var block inside of a function, I can't access that from out here. I can only access if it's block scope, which sucks. That's even like that's like more stuff to remember, right? But that's what var used to do. But think of it as like a fossil that you appreciate that it's extinct. Like the really big sharks that used to roam around, like that's great, it's interesting. I'm glad it's not around. Cool. Okay, almost there. Some best practices. So if you define a variable on the global scope, right? Try to stay away from redefining it, right? So if you've defined something up here, don't redefine to something else. What's one way to actually prevent this from happening in the first place? Const. Exactly. If I said const always true equals true, I can't reassign it from inside of a function. I can't reassign it like ever, whether it's global or functional, right? So const will prevent errors like this from the first place. Now, why do you think it's important to not redefine stuff that's globally defined? Why is that a good rule of thumb? Huh? Oh yeah. So why do you think they are trying to get you to not reassign a variable that's globally defined? So why is it a bad idea to take this variable and assign it something else? Yes.
Wouldn't that like that variable that's global be used in other functions?
Yes.
Not just the actual
Exactly, right? So the reason you want to define anything ever on the global scope is because you're assuming that that variable is going to be shared across different functions. Like a lot of different functions will access this one thing. A lot of different team members might access this one thing, this one like configuration. And if this configuration changes, it impacts the rest of your code base, right? So things that are defined globally should generally be unchanging. So for example, a database password, right? Let's say you have a function, right, that interacts with the database. Specifically, it creates a user in the database. And to create a user in the database, it needs the password first to give you access to interact with the database, right? And you have another function that's like delete someone from the database. And all of these functions, all these database functions require, right, this password to be like right, to be correct. And let's say one of the functions just goes ahead and changes the password to some other value, right? Then you end up screwing things up for everyone else. So globally defined variables should not change for the most part. Cool. Okay. Yeah.
So, say you have like two separate functions,
Yes.
and you try to redefine it in the second function, will it also give you an error? Does that make sense? If you
Yeah.
call it in two separate places, but since they're like within the scope of like the function.
Yeah. So yes.
That's what we're trying to avoid, right? So we
Yes.
can confuse it, but it's still possible. Like it'll still.
So yes, we would like to avoid redefining in any way, right? So even if it's a second function, like someone could then add a third function. You know what I mean? Or they could choose to call the second function first and then the first function. You know what I mean? Because like it's just about like when you decide to invoke it.
Right.
So yeah. Good question. So if you absolutely need to define, right, a variable inside of a function that's the same as a global, just do it. Just define it, right? Don't reassign. Just create a new one. Create a new variable, and that you can make whatever. And so later on, another function that is depending on this to be true will still get that, right? Because this hasn't changed.
Right.
This is just a brand new thing. But even this, I would try to stay away from. Right? This is confusing. To have the same variable name like in different levels of scopes, I think it's confusing. But if you have to, just redefine it. Cool. Cool. All right, and that was it. Any questions? Awesome. Okay. Stop here.